Hey, what's up, guys? Okay, so chapter 270 of Black Clover is out, and this week we actually got the cover page for Shonen Jump, although we didn't get a colored cover page for the chapter, which was a little disappointing at first, but considering the fact that not that long ago we had pretty much, I want to say 3 or 4 colored cover pages almost in a row, I think separated by maybe 2 or 3 chapters between each one, it makes sense that we wouldn't get one for this chapter, even though we did get the cover page for Shonen Jump. Also, by the way, want to just throw a quick shout out. Black Clover has reached, I believe, 11 million copies or like 11 million volumes sold. That's a huge accomplishment. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. But anyway, congratulations to Black Clover. Congratulations to Tabata Yuki for making that accomplishment. Also, one more thing I want to point out before I get into the actual chapter. Apparently, I actually just found this out, but apparently Shonen Jump's actually going to be going on break. I believe we get the next 2 chapters, like these next 2 weeks, and then after that it's going to go on a 2-week break, and then come back sometime in December. I want to say beginning of December or maybe the second week of December. So just notice we had 2 more chapters and we're going to take a 2-week break. But anyway, getting into the actual chapter, because if you already seen my spoiler video for it, or my video on the leaks for this week's chapter, you know that the leaks pretty much covered the entire chapter, pretty much the entire thing got spoiled. So I already kind of gave my analysis of what's going on in the chapter, even though it didn't have the dialogue translated. So because of that, when I'm talking about this week's chapter in the review, I won't actually be going through the sequence of events like I usually do. I would basically just give my kind of opinions and basically giving like an analysis on what happened instead of just giving you guys the play-by-play. Okay, so getting into the chapter, which I know I said I wasn't going to give you guys the play-by-play, but I have to start it off this way. We start the chapter off literally where the last one left off. Asa knocking down Lee with the same thrust move that Yami used to fight off against Dante with, I believe it was called the Death Thrust, even though Asta obviously wasn't trying to kill Lee in this attack. But anyway, he knocks Lee down, puts the sword in front of Lee's face, says, alright, I'm the winner. And then immediately after that, we see Lee, he acknowledges in his head, you can tell that this is what happened in the scene. We get a small panel where Lee is kind of like biting his lip or like kind of like grunting at Asta. And you can see this is kind of him acknowledging in his head, I can't beat this kid, which activates the ritual, putting a collar around his neck and pretty much putting him in the subordinate situation or the subordinate role for the contracted to it and we're going to form. Now, what's really cool about this is the fact that once Nox steps in and says, all right, now that he has a collar around his neck, this is your chance to basically form the contract. You will be the master. He'll be a subordinate. You'll control everything that he says and does, and basically, if he tries to disobey you, the collar will force him to listen to your orders. And immediately Asta says, I don't want to do that. And I don't think any of us are surprised by the fact that Asta actually turned down the ritual of basically having Lee be a servant and him being the master, because Asta is not the kind of character who would want to put himself over anyone else, even his enemies. He's never seen himself as being better than. He is pretty much the embodiment of what Lumiere wanted to accomplish with the Clover Kingdom, and pretty much what the embodiment of the series is about. That is, everyone is equal no matter what your upbringing is, no matter what your power level is, no matter what kind of status you have, everyone's equal. That's literally what Asta has been driving for since the beginning of the series. That's literally one of his main goals once he becomes Magic Emperor, to make a kingdom that everyone can be equal in. So even the thought that he would ever try to form a master-servant contract with someone, let alone someone that he's actually felt indebted to, as we saw back when the two of them actually officially first met. Asta's first instance, not even acting in fear, not even acting in surprise by the fact that there's a devil standing right in front of him. The first thing Asta did when Lee was summoned during his ritual was to thank him for all the help he's brought him throughout the entire time that Asta's been a Magic Knight since he's gotten his grimoire. And even if that wasn't the case, even if Lee hadn't been helping Asta the entire series by providing him with anti-magic abilities, Asta still, even if Lee was his mortal enemy, Asta still would not have wanted to basically put him in a servant position. He would have extended his hand out the same exact way no matter what. I mean, we've seen it plenty of times throughout the series. Even if someone is Asta's enemy or his rival or basically a threat to him at the current moment, he has no problem basically the next time they meet or, in the future, believing that the two of them can be friends. We've seen it happen plenty of times throughout the series. I mean, remember back to Mars? Mars was a big threat to him. Mars pretty much almost killed Noelle. Mars almost killed Asta and and Luck, all of them. And yet, the next time Asta and him met, they were working alongside each other like they had been friends for years. Asta had no problem flipping the script on that. When it came to Patry caused everything that happened in the last arc. Everything that happened in the reincarnation arc was all because of Patry. And still, instead of basically, just condemning Patry, instead of basically, just throwing Patry to book, throwing him in jail, doing anything, killing him, Asta extended his hand out when Patry needed help and brought him back into the light. So because of that, there's no way Asta would ever try to basically force Lieb into a servant position, because Asta's just not that kind of character. Plus, on top of that, Asta also mentioned back in the last chapter, or not the last chapter, but the chapter before that, that he didn't want to fight Lieb because of the fact that he could sense through his key that Lieb was actually holding back the entire time and actually didn't want to kill him. And he reconfirms that in this chapter, where he actually says, when he's talking to Nock, and Nock is basically, asking him why isn't he going forward with the master servant contract, Asta brings up the fact that the entire time Lieb was fighting him, he probably could have killed him, but he was pulling his punches. And again, if Asta is saying that Lieb was holding back throughout their fight, then we can take it as 100% true, because of the fact that Asta's key sensing abilities have developed to the point where not only can he use it to read his opponent's movements, but he can also kind of use it to basically tell a person's intentions and what their personality is like. So if he's using his key sensing abilities to basically tell that Lieb was holding back and that he's actually at heart a good person, we know it's a fact. Now, after Asta rejects the idea of having Lieb be a servant, we see the chain start to disintegrate, and then basically the chain ends up disappearing once the two of them form their 50-50 contract. And the reason why I think this happens is because of the fact that when they're in the ritual circle that basically forms the contract for them, the reason why they had to fight is because they had to basically mentally believe their positions in the contract. So by basically subduing Lieb in the last chapter and the beginning of this chapter, Lieb basically came to the realization that he can't kill Asta. So because of that, he was forced to wear the collar and basically put in the servant's position of the contract. And if Asta had mentally decided in his head, I'm better than this person, if I'm better than this devil, I can control him, then he would have automatically formed the master part of the contract. So because of the fact that Asta rejected that idea and never had that kind of thought or that kind of mentality of I'm better than him and I'm the master, the contract didn't form. So once Lieb accepted the idea of him and Asta finally being partners and being, equally involved in their contract, then the chain disappeared and basically him and Asta became a 50-50 contract. And now that we know how this ritual works, it makes me wonder, how did the Dark Triad form their contracts with their devils? Did they do the same ritual that Nock had Asta do in this chapter, or in these past few chapters? Which, if they did, I have a hard time believing that anyone besides Zeno would have been able to, basically corner their devil into a master servant contract. So it makes me wonder, how did that go? Because, alright, with Zeno's devil, even though we don't know what its name is just yet, we know that it only has spatial magic, which spatial magic, as we've seen with some characters, can be very useful, even in fighting stances or fighting instances. With Zeno's abilities, it seems like he would probably still have the upper hand over his devil. I mean, keep in mind, even though he's used his dark form multiple times, we've never actually seen him use spatial magic to fight. He's only ever used his bone magic. So really, he's pretty much just using his devil as a boost to his power. He's not even really relying on it that much besides transportation. When it comes to Vanica, Vanica's kind of the same way. She's using her own blood magic, mostly in fights, and then she's just kind of relying on Mekikua when she gets pushed to a corner. So I can see that her contract probably went around the same way that Asta did. Maybe Mekikua was so entertained by Vanica's craziness that he's like, or that she's like, all right, you know what? I'm just going to form a 50-50 contract with you. I'm not going to basically force you into a certain role, or we're not going to try to let you force me into a certain role. We're going to basically be equal partners. And maybe that's the reason why she's the only one we see to have that hybrid form, where Megikua had control of half her body and Vanica had control of the other half. Now, when it comes to Dante, because of the fact that Dante's magic is just flesh magic, and even though we've seen that grotesque magic, I'm sorry, it is grotesque. Even though we've seen that grotesque magic be kind of useful when it comes to healing, I can't imagine it had that many offensive abilities, and we saw that during his fight against Asta and Yami, he was mostly using gravitation magic that Lucifero has. So I'm guessing that if they did do the same kind of ritual, that Dante would more likely end up being in the servant role. Now, obviously him and Lucifero have some kind of good relationship going, so even if they are in the master-servant kind of relationship, it seems like they're kind of playing fast and loose with that, and they don't really, like Lucifero's not really controlling Dante at the moment. But still, if this is how these rituals went down, or this is the same ritual that each one of them used, I would imagine that this is how the rituals went down. Zeno controls his devil, Vanica has 50-50 contract, and Lucifero is more than likely the master in that situation. Now, last thing I'm going to say about the ritual is that I'm hoping we actually do end up finding out later on, maybe if my idea about Zeno being the master and his devil being the servant in their contract, I hope we end up finding out later on that that's actually the case, because I'm kind of interested Since we saw the collar in such detail in the chapter and saw like the devil runes that were on it, I'm kind of interested in seeing how that works. Like when your devil just kind of disobeys you, I want to see what the effects of it being forced to obey its master is. Because I imagine it kind of being like a shock collar for a dog, where if a dog doesn't do what you tell it to do, or it's misbehaving, you just press a button and it shocks it. And if that's the case, I wonder how that kind of affects the devil's mentality towards his master. Because obviously, if it's forced into a position of servitude, it's going to resent his master, which obviously that would mean that Xenos devil probably does resent him if it is forced to listen to him. Which would be interesting to see what happens if at some point, if Xeno gets defeated by Yuno later on in the arc. If something happens where his devil gets free from the contract and he basically just goes after Xeno and basically takes his revenge. That would be an interesting plot point. I don't think the bot's going to go that route, but it would be an interesting plot point to get. Now, if you saw my video on the leaks, you know that I thought when we got to this part of the chapter when Asta was basically rejecting the idea of the master servant contract, when we saw Nox's eyes open up, and when Nox's eyes open up, that means he is serious about something. When we saw him with his eyes opening up, and he was basically, asking Asta, why are you not taking the contract? I thought this is basically where Nox was basically just going to turn on Asta, or not really turn on him, but this was Nox being angry at the fact that Asta was rejecting the idea of being the one in control over his devil. But we end up finding out later on in the chapter that Nox is actually very okay with this. In fact, this is actually what Nox was hoping for. He says that Asta made the right choice, and we see him smile in like a very genuine, not sarcastic at all, but very genuine smile. Probably the first genuine smile we've seen him have throughout the entire series, or since his introduction. And this is when we end up finding out and getting confirmation officially that Nox has 4 different devils. We already knew about Gimodel, and now we get introduced to the other 3, even though we kind of already saw them during the Captain's meeting. But we get introduced to all 4 of them, and we find out, because of the fact that none of them have the collar on as well, that Nox more than likely had the same kind of ritual go down where he has an equal partnership with his 4 devils. Which is very interesting to find out, because of the fact that Nox, it seemed like with the way Tabata was presenting Nox's character, I wouldn't have questioned that he forced all 4 of them to have the Master Servant ritual, but finding out that he didn't makes it seem like his character is a lot softer than we initially gave him credit for, and it's making me, again, even more interested in finding out what his backstory is and finding out exactly what's going on with him, how he even came in contact with these 4, and what caused him to basically form the contract with them, and actually for them to be so friendly with him that they aren't even trying to force him or trying to overpower him or anything like that. They just actually want to be, on equal terms with him. I gotta say, the more Tabata shows us of Noct, the more I'm starting to like him. He's kind of like Sesshomaru from Inuyasha, in my opinion. I mean, it's a very, very out there comparison, but he's kind of like him where at first, when Sesshomaru was first introduced in Inuyasha, I was like, alright, this guy's an asshole, I don't like him. The more we see of him, the more I hate him. And then, as the series goes on, we start to see him get softer and become more, not friendly, but he was softer. He wasn't as hard as he was before, because in the beginning of the series, Sesshomaru would have killed anybody without a second thought. And then as the series goes on, he started doing that a lot less. And we're starting to get the same thing with Noct, because in the beginning, when he was introduced, he very much seemed like the character who would kill anybody just because they got in his way. Just because they got in the way of the plan that he had. Even though his plan is ultimately for the better good, he still seemed like the kind of character who would kill anybody mercilessly without a second thought. But now in this chapter, it seems like we're starting to see a softer, more lighter side of Noct. And I'm interested in finding out more about him now. I can definitely say, because of the fact that I was on the fence of whether or not I like Noct or whether or not I don't like his character, I can definitely say I'm leaning more towards liking him now after this chapter. Especially when we end up finding out that Noct has a badass, Bloodborne looking dark form. I mean, seriously, that dark form, if you haven't read the chapter, go look at that scene. That Bloodborne look that he has is killer. I mean, this is probably the best dark form we've seen the entire thing. I mean, I really can't stop geeking out about this design, especially because I really love the game of Bloodborne. So seeing this design, it kind of looks like the Hunter from Bloodborne, like literally like the title character for that series. Then it just looks so fucking amazing. Oh, I forgot to mention that during the chapter, right before Lieb actually fully accepts Asta's, basically offer for the 50-50 contract, we get this moment where Lieb officially finally realizes that Asta is Lucida's child, which completely blew my mind, because I thought that the whole flashback we got 2 chapters ago was actually him realizing that there's similarities between Asta and Lucida, and that he kind of already knew that she was his mother. So I literally thought he had already knew that going into this chapter, but apparently he hadn't really figured that out until this chapter. Which is cool. I mean, at least now he finally does know, and this actually could get into him some kind of like talking points to basically bond even more. Be like, hey, your mom, even though she abandoned you, which she had good reason to, I'll explain the reason why she did it in a second, but, you know, even though she abandoned you, she did kind of adopt me, so we're kind of like adopted brothers. So, like, the two of them going forward, I can see having the same kind of relationship that him and Yuno have, where even though Lee was probably going to poke fun at Asta, make fun of him a lot more, and basically, like, be a nuisance to him, whenever Asta's in danger, Lee will be the first one to jump out in his defense. And we've seen literally Yuno do the exact same thing throughout the entirety of the series. So again, it's literally just going to be Yuno 2.0, but you know, this time it's actually going to be the person who's the source of Asta's powers. And you know what, actually speaking of Yuno, I want to see next what's going on with Yuno. We don't really need to see the fight go down between Noct and Asta. It would be cool, but I'd rather wait and see exactly what Noct's capable of doing in his dark form towards the later parts of the arc when he's actually fighting against one of the devils. But now that we know that Asta's going to be training with Noct in order to basically get better abilities, or basically learn how to use his abilities with Leap better, and now that we know that the Heart Kingdom group is going to be training with the elves, I want to now go and focus on what's going on with Yuno. Exactly how is he going to get stronger in 2 to 3 days, so that when he ends up going up against Zeno, it won't be a complete massacre like it was last time. And I saw a lot of people saying that they think that Yuno's going to actually use the magic stones to get the power boost he needs, so that when him and Zeno fight again, they'll be on more equal terms. And I can see that actually being a possibility. I mean, the magic stones are kind of just out there. We know that he does have one as his necklace, so he possibly could just get the other ones and use them. But at the same time, I would rather him not go that route. I would rather find out a better way for Yuno to actually get his abilities boosted, you know, a more permanent way. Because yeah, that's a cool idea, him using magic stones to basically get the power boost. But what happens if he loses magic stones? What happens if, you know, the magic stones go missing or someone steals them? Then he's back to the same power level he was prior to having them. I would rather see him get some kind of power boost that would actually end up being permanent, like the other characters are getting, so that he can stay on par with Asta. Because right now, he is definitely way behind Asta in power. The two of them before the time skip were about equal. Now he is way behind Asta. So in order to basically catch up and stay caught up, he needs to find a permanent power source or a permanent way to get stronger. I don't know exactly what that could entail or what that could be, but he needs to find something. Oh yeah, and speaking of characters getting power-ups, and this has nothing to do with the chapter at all, but prior to last week's chapter coming out, we had some fake leaks that came out that, and if you know, last week we didn't actually get leaks for the chapter, but there were some fake ones that came out that said that we would end up seeing by the end of the chapter Magna and Zora training with Mereoleona. And I was very excited about that because I was hoping we would actually get to see those 3 characters soon. And obviously we actually didn't get to see that in last week's chapter, which very much disappointed me. But now that that idea was put out in my head, I really want to see what's going on with those 3 characters. I mean, Magna and Zora, we know the 2 of them were training together. So I'm really interested in exactly what the fruits of their labor are, what exactly came of their training. And then when it comes to Mereoleona, we already saw how much of a badass she was in the last arc. Think about how much stronger she's become in 6 months, knowing that she had to train in order to fight off against these devils, and how excited she would have been to do that. So you know she probably put even more effort than anybody into getting stronger. And we saw just how strong Yami had became in 6 months. You can imagine how strong she did. Now we pretty much gone over everything that happened in the chapter. I mean, I kind of skipped over the actual contract being made between Asta and Leeb, and really all that happened when that happened was the 2 of them shook hands. They got these like rune circles, like basically the seal for the contract formed around their wrist. And then when that happened, Asta got his arm back, even though Leeb stuck around. So that was a little surprising. Leeb, I kind of figured that once they formed the contract, Leeb would kind of just go back to being inside Asta, or at the very least turn into like a chibi version of himself. But he stuck around and he's in his full form. He didn't seem all that surprised or impressed by Noct's dark form, which I guess kind of goes with his character. But yeah, now that we pretty much talked about everything that happened in the chapter, I'm just going to quickly talk about what I think is going to come as a result of their training. Basically, I think that that dark form, that like kind of advanced, like rage-filled dark form that Asta had when he was fighting Dante after he got knocked out the first time, I feel like that's going to be their more powered up dark form going forward, and that's actually going to be like their main form when they fight off against Dante and Lucifero again. And I also think that basically the same abilities that we saw Leeb have in the last chapter, where he was basically controlling the swords through like kind of telepathy, where he's basically just using the swords without actually having to touch them. I have a feeling that we're going to see Asta using that same kind of ability in the fights coming up against Dante. Basically, I can see him summoning all 4 swords, maybe controlling Yami's sword with his own hands, and using all 3 of the other swords mentally to basically attack Dante, which would actually give him a very good upper hand in that fight. Because in terms of power, I don't think that by the end of this training they're going to be strong enough to defeat Lucifero, especially once Lucifero actually is free and fully in the human world in his actual devil form. So they're going to need every trick they can have in order to defeat him, and this actually would be a great distraction, at the very least a great advantage to have over him when they're fighting him in the flesh. But that's pretty much all that happened in the chapter, guys. That's pretty much it for the review. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, drop me a like, subscribe to the channel. I would greatly appreciate it. Comment down below with your thoughts and theories, and that's it. Pretty much, I'll catch you guys in the next chapter. Peace.